Hello everyone. Today, thanks to the informant, I'm going to share a sad and mysterious story about Gyeryongsan Mountain in Korea. Today's story topic is quite bizarre and quite sad. The person who told this story is just an ordinary acquaintance I know. Though he currently lives well in this modern age somewhere near Gyeryongsan Mountain in Korea, don't we sometimes feel stories that tug at our hearts? Today might be a somewhat sad story. You know, among many ghost stories, there are quite a few about Gyeryongsan Mountain, right? Most of them are stories like I saw a ghost or I was bewitched, and so on. But the story I've brought today is not quite similar when compared to those stories, but it still has one unique characteristic, and I've directly brought such a story. So the acquaintance who delivered today's story, I'll call him Young-soo and tell the tale. The time period, if we go back, is just a long time ago, somewhat old. On Gyeryongsan Mountain, there's a place called Baekmu-dong Mudang-gol-jagi. It's naturally very beautiful there, with many peaks, a few waterfalls in nice locations, and excellent scenery. Since ancient times, shamans have used it as a prayer ground, going up and down there. I understand many shamans still visit the place now. Anyway, the main character of this story is Young-soo's grandmother. Young-soo's grandmother was from a nearby village called Baekmu village, and she was born and raised there. But that doesn't mean Young-soo's grandmother was a shaman. She was just a small, ordinary village girl. Young-soo's grandmother's name was Bongsun-i, and I'll begin the full story. One of the stories Bongsun-i heard and grew up with as a child was about the origin of the name Baekmu village, located near the village where Bongsun-i lived. You know, in this modern age, many things develop rapidly, so village legends and other folklore-like stories aren't well passed down anymore. But even at that time, the stories of various origins and legends of the village, and such stories, were being handed down through generations. And regarding the legend of Baekmu village that Bongsun-i heard, long ago there was someone called Chonwang grandmother, who was considered the beginning of shamans, and that grandmother appeared in the form of a young lady, was noticed by a Buddhist monk named Baekmu who had lost his way deep in the mountains, and the monk fell head over heels at first sight and earnestly pleaded for marriage. They married and had 8 daughters, and as the daughters spread throughout the country, they became famous shamans. And because 100 shamans came from that village, it's called Baekmu village, meaning the village of 100 shamans. That's the story Bongsun-i heard from childhood. At that time, she witnessed many shamans going in and out of Gyeryongsan Mountain, seeing them indirectly from afar, and in a sense, she came to know shamans somewhat closely. Anyway, that's how Bongsun-i, after passing through a childhood of hearing various stories, entered adolescence, and when she turned 16 years old, that year she experienced a small incident. But what was somewhat special about Bongsun-i was that by the standards of that era, other girls her age were barely finished with elementary school, helping their parents work half-days or doing housework. But Bongsun-i studied well, was smart, and had strong academic passion. So she went to middle school, then high school, and though it was rare for that era, she even went to college, I hear. But what lies behind this background? Young-soo's great-grandfather, which means Bongsun-i's father, was quite a wealthy and influential man in that region. Moreover, he was one of the rare enlightened men of that era. He had his 2 sons study, and for his youngest daughter Bongsun-i, he believed that in this modern age, she should study as a new woman. He was quite an enlightened man, which was rare to see. So he fully supported Bongsun-i, and because of this, while other children her age were working in the fields, tending rice paddies, and helping with housework, Bongsun-i alone wore her school uniform and commuted to and from school. But among her neighborhood friends, Bongsun-i was both an object of envy and, to other friends, an object of jealousy and resentment. Most friends wanted to try wearing Bongsun-i's school uniform at least once. The school uniforms themselves were rare items in that era, and only a handful of wealthy families could afford them. So having a school uniform meant you came from a wealthy family. Young-soo's grandmother, despite being in such an advantageous position, was a gentle and humble person. Even though she was different from her friends due to her education, she didn't boast about it or act arrogantly. On the contrary, she was said to be quite kind and friendly. So she was quite popular at school. But despite this, there were still friends who harbored jealousy. Around the time Bongsun-i was 16, something happened. One day, Bongsun-i was walking home from school when she encountered some girls who were jealous of her. These girls, out of jealousy and resentment, conspired to harm Bongsun-i. They attacked her and pushed her down a ravine. The fall was quite severe, and Bongsun-i lost consciousness. By the time help came, she was in critical condition. She was rushed to the hospital, but her condition was grave. However, miraculously, she survived. After recovering from her injuries, she returned to school, but something had changed. From that point on, Bongsun-i began to experience strange phenomena. She would sometimes see things that others couldn't see. She would hear voices calling her name. Strange dreams began plaguing her nights. Her family was deeply concerned about her state. As time passed, these strange occurrences became more frequent and more intense. Bongsun-i felt as though she was being called by something from the mountains. She would wake up in the middle of the night with an irresistible urge to go toward the Gyeryongsan Mountains. Her parents grew increasingly worried. They consulted with shamans and spiritual practitioners, thinking their daughter might be spiritually selected or cursed. But despite their efforts, Bongsun-i's condition continued to deteriorate. She became withdrawn, barely eating or sleeping. Her health declined rapidly. One night, she walked out toward the mountains in a trance-like state. When her family realized she was missing, they searched frantically. They found her the next morning at the base of the mountains, unconscious and with no memory of how she got there. This incident repeated several times over the following weeks. Each time, Bongsun-i would wander toward the mountains, and each time, her family would find her just in time to prevent disaster. Finally, her father made a difficult decision. He would take her to the shamans at Gyeryongsan Mountain. Perhaps, he thought, there was something spiritual drawing her there. Perhaps the shamans would understand what was happening to her. So Bongsun-i was brought to Gyeryongsan Mountain. There, the shamans examined her and came to a conclusion that shook the family. They said Bongsun-i had been spiritually chosen to become a shaman. The shamans explained that the incident on her 16th birthday, the fall that had nearly killed her, was not merely an accident. It was a spiritual awakening, a calling from the spirit world. The shamans said that her journey to become a Mudang, a shaman, had already begun. Despite the family's initial resistance, the shaman's words seemed to ring true. Bongsun-i's strange episodes subsided once she accepted this calling. The obsessive urge to go to the mountains lessened. Her health improved. Her family eventually accepted the decision. Bongsun-i underwent training to become a shaman, and she eventually became a renowned Mudang, known throughout the region for her spiritual abilities. But the sadness of this story lies not in her becoming a shaman. The sadness comes from what she had to give up. Though Bongsun-i's father had been progressive enough to support her education, once she became a shaman, many of the opportunities he had fought for her to have were no longer available. Marriage prospects changed. Career options that had opened to educated women were no longer accessible. Her life was now devoted to her spiritual calling. She could never quite return to the life that had been promised to her in her youth. And so Bongsun-i, despite her intelligence, her education, her potential, found herself bound by a path she did not choose. The tragedy is that what society deemed her spiritual destiny ultimately overrode all her other possibilities. And this is the story that was passed down through the generations in Young-su's family. A sad tale of a brilliant young woman whose life was forever changed by circumstances beyond her control. Thank you for listening.